And welcome back to Movies and More with Shivam Pota. I'm your host, Shivam Pota, and we have a very special episode today. So, we have a film composer who has not only composed one of the best films of last year, but he's composing the indie heavyweights of this year, as well as the fact that he is in the band The Dig, and he's also composing Homecoming Season 2. Please welcome Emile Mosseri.
All right. Thanks for having me, man. It's great to be here. It's great to meet you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Okay. So hope you are doing well in the current situation in the lockdown and quarantine. So how are you spending your time
Uh,
in this current situation?
yeah, I thanks for asking. I'm writing a lot of music and I'm doing a lot of yard work. My wife and I just moved into a house and we're working on the house a lot and yeah, just trying to stay busy, just trying to stay sane. I'm very lucky to be in Los Angeles and almost everyone I know is healthy and okay, so I'm lucky. It's a scary time, but yeah, I've been for the most part staying productive and staying good. How about
Yeah, that's
yourself?
good.
How are things over there?
So we've thing is that over here I'd say my life or like the day to day lifestyle changed around I would say January, mid January when we started getting a few cases in Singapore. So I've already somewhat adapted to it. But currently because my exams have been cancelled and there's nothing school wise left for me to do, I've been doing my best to channel all my energy into productive work. I'm working on a big video essay, I'm working on a new short film, and it's a whole host of things. And I'm also working on this podcast and a new podcast I've set up with my friend Mandy, who lives over in India. So,
Amazing, amazing.
yep. Recently, your band started a new project called Human Love. Tell us about that for a bit.
Oh yeah, correct. Yeah. So I grew up with a couple guys that have been playing in different bands with my whole life, mostly as the formation called the Dig with my friends Mark, David, and Eric. And we recently started a new project together called Human Love, which is, it's more cinematic, it's more beat driven, and it's more expansive. I think we lived in New York for a decade, and we were on the road for a decade playing shows, putting out records, and then we all moved to LA a few years ago and started our own solo projects and started working with other artists. And I was collaborating with other filmmakers, and they were collaborating with other artists, and while still working together. And then we came back together and wrote a an EP together up in Northern California in Stinson Beach, and we just put out the first single from that record. We just put it out last week, so yeah, it's exciting. It's an exciting time, a new chapter for us, but um, with longtime collaborators.
So you mentioned, you have a band called The Dig, and that's currently what most people know you for. So I have to ask, because you've been in the Dig for quite a while. Who was your favorite band to tour with, and what was your favorite place to perform?
I think our favorite band that we ever toured with was the Walkmen. It's a great band from DC and then from New York. And yeah, we played mostly in the States. But yeah, we loved playing in Texas. We loved playing in San Antonio, Texas. I think that was our favorite city to play in the world. And I think our fan base there was really generous and really enthusiastic and warm. And we always loved coming back there. And um, yeah,
So you mentioned that you did a lot of touring around the country for a decade. What was it like once all the touring had ended? How was it adapting back to the sort of regular day to day type thing?
it's a good question. it's a different life, when you're not in a different city every night and you're still busy making records and scoring films, but you're not in transit all the time. In a way it's simpler, in a way it's healthier, and but in a way, I miss touring too because it's the best and worst thing in the world to be on the road. It's like the highs are the highest and the lows are the lowest, and I think you're really alive living in that state. And I was lucky to be able to do it for a long time, and I'm going to do it again, with Human Love, and we're going to once, provided that we come out of this pandemic, um, and people start going to concerts again. Won't be for a while, but I look forward to doing it again once things reopen.
So, is there any country that you haven't played in yet that you really want to do a show in? Or like a city in different, or like it's a city that you haven't been to, or country,
We've o-
just somewhere that you want to tour or
There's
visit
so many.
with your
There's
band.
so many. Yeah, we've only played in America and Canada and the UK. We haven't played in any other country. So, there's too many to mention. I'd love to come to Singapore. Love to play in Brazil. I'd love to play in Mexico. There's a lot of places that I've never been that I'd love to go. And then I'd also love to perform there, both. Um,
S-
so yeah, there's kind of
So,
too many to mention.
hmm. So, who are your inspirations as both a musician and as a composer?
There's a lot. There's very many. As a composer, I love I there's a few old Italian composers that I love. The really famous ones, Morricone and Nina Rota. Or Nina Rota might be my favorite composer, film composer. Um, but all kinds of bands. I think Randy Newman and Neil Young are my favorite songwriters, and um, as far as bands, I love all the old bands from England, the Kinks and the Stones. And, there's all kinds of music. You hope that kind of it all you soak it in and it comes out in your work in one place or another. But yeah, there's not like one artist in particular that's my favorite.
So, throughout all your music, both in compositions and your work with the Dig, and as well as your new work with Human Love, what is the hidden meaning behind your music in your own eyes?
I don't know that there's a hidden meaning. I think we just there's it depends. It's case by case. It depends on the song. It depends on the album. It depends on the film score. I think as far as the Dig, there is no specific hidden meaning in any of the um, songs. Each song means something to different people. With the Dig and with Human Love, there are three songwriters in the band: myself and David and Eric write songs and write the lyrics. So, and sometimes we collaborate, and sometimes somebody writes a whole song lyrically on their own. And so each song is specific to that experience.
So, as mentioned, obviously, you have done a wide range of things when it comes to musical creativity. So, the question is, what is your favorite part of being a musician as well as a composer? But also, are there any downsides to being a musical creative?
Sure, yeah. There are lots of downsides. I think. Um, I don't know, getting obsessed with whatever you're working on and losing yourself in it, and sometimes if it's not working out, if you run into a wall and you feel like you have really good taste in music, but you can feel the gap between what you're making and what you believe is greatness. That can be painful, and it's sort of it doesn't let up. Overall it's a very very lucky to 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 be to make music for a living, and that's not lost on me. I feel very blessed and lucky to have this job.
And what are your favorite parts of being a musical creative?
I think collaboration. Working with another great artist, and you there's a magic that happens there that's very special, and um, that's the best thing in the world when you find an artist that you love to work with, and they bring out the best in you, and you bring out the best in them, and you can make something beautiful together and watch it on a big screen, or you can you know listen to it on a record or play it live to share it with other people. Like that whole thing is truly magical. It sounds cliche or cheesy, but um, that's is the highest high that I know is working with other people, and when it all clicks, it can be really rewarding.
So, throughout your career as a musician, have you ever dealt with performance anxiety, whether it be on stage, performing in front of a crowd of thousands, or in the studio composing your next score, or creating the next album?
Sure, yeah, there's always anxiety. But I think that's it's part of it. I think that's healthy to be anxious because um, I think the minute you're not anxious, you you can get complacent, and your work can stand still. It's being afraid so that sometimes can push you to get better. Um, it's part of the rush. It gives you like you have fire in your belly to do good, and um, if there's no fear of failure, then it's less exciting.
Oh, I 100% agree. As someone who is a filmmaker, the moment if you don't question or look inside your own work, and just be a little bit nervous, then you might end up constantly being in praise of yourself, and that can lead you to think whatever you do is a masterpiece or the next amazing thing, and that could end up allowing you to slip into a place of constant output but not constant quality.
I agree, man. Well put. It's really true.
So, what made you decide that you wanted to somewhat shift, um, to also become a composer? How was like what was the shift like, and what are the biggest differences? Which one do you feel is more rewarding, but which one is also more challenging in your eyes?
They're just different, they both have their challenges and their rewards. I'd always been interested in film music since I was a kid. I saw Edward Scissorhands was out, and when I was a kid, and The Godfather too. Those were two early movies I saw where the score really really grabbed me. Or I thought that's like a whole world, and you can just listen to one of those themes from one of those film scores, and the whole film comes flooding back. And I got really romantic about that at an early age, and I wanted to do it. So I studied classical composition in college, and but then I left school and I kind of put it away for a decade and was playing in bands, and I was on the road, and I kind of revisited it when you know when I moved out to LA in a way, because I started working on a TV show for this great artist named Terrence Nance, who had a show on HBO that he had asked me to contribute music to, and that's sort of how I got into it out here in LA, and that's how I you know I fell in love with it again.
So, do you feel when you went back into composition, whether it be through the HBO on HBO, the show if in question is it Random Acts of
That's
Flyness?
right, yeah, that's the one.
So, do you feel once you entered back into there and then you continued with Last Black Man San Francisco, did it bring a sense of nostalgia back to you? Finally going back to like classical composition type
Yeah,
music.
absolutely, yeah, in a way, but it also was a little bit terrifying because with Last Black Man in San Francisco, I hadn't I'd written for Terrence for a few of his projects and Random Acts of Flyness, and I'd written classical music before, but I'd never written a whole orchestral score by myself for a feature length film. I was a first for me. And I told Joe, the director of Last Black Man in San Francisco, and the producers that I could do it, and I wasn't really sure that I could do it. I just told them I could do it, and then I had to figure out how to do it. So it's sort of that like fake it till you make it thing, where you jump in, and it's terrifying, and you hope that you pull it off. And I was lucky to work with such great artists like Joe, and um, we found the thing together, and he's brilliant, and um, he was able to get uh, the score out of me and direct it, and find the way he wanted the musical language for his film that he wanted to use. So that was really exciting.
I personally would say you did an incredible job with Last Black Man San Francisco. I feel it's one of the
Thanks, man.
best film scores to come out of the last few years, personally, and it's one of my personal favorite scores for any film.
Wow, thanks, man. You're making my day over here. I really appreciate that.
So, which I know this is a somewhat tough question, but when it comes to composing and music, like album music, and your regular like the day against, which do you feel has more challenges and which comes off as more rewarding at points?
Well, between the dig and or between human love and scoring.
Yeah.
I think it's more challenging in a way to make a record than it is to score a film. For me, it's more challenging to make a record because, especially with a band, because you're collaborating with other musicians and other composers and other songwriters and other lyricists, and to make something cohesive, it's the most rewarding, but it's the most challenging because you have to navigate a lot of different artistic voices, and also when you're singing, you're more vulnerable, than when you're just writing instrumental music. So as challenging as scoring films are with writing music for an orchestra and producing it, and all of the workload that comes with that, it's somehow less daunting than going to a house with four other guys and making a record or living with them for a month. That's the most challenging thing, but also the most fun.
So you've been a musician for a large while now. So what's the craziest thing, like the craziest moment that's happened to you as a musician?
Oh man, I don't know. I think getting the opportunity to write the score for Last Black Man, and that's a crazy. I never would have imagined I would have moved out to LA and started writing music for an orchestra like that. So I think that was probably the craziest moment in my musical life.
So I know that you started a band with David Baldwin when you were around 10. So how has your music evolved since the very, very early days of your musical prospects and all the way now where you've moved into composition?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that was David Baldwin and I have been making music together for 24 years. And Eric Iser and David Baldwin and I have been making music together for 20 years, for 19 years. So, yeah, the three of us have been collaborating on stuff for forever, for a whole lifetime. And very lucky to be working with those guys. They're brilliant. And, the music's changed over the years, but the dynamic between us hasn't really changed all that much.
So now we're going to move on into more questions to do with the film scoring and your process and that whole world of your career. So, with regards to Last Black Man San Francisco, it's a very obviously a very San Francisco based film, and the city of San Francisco is basically a character in the film. How did
Absolutely.
you capture the energy and atmosphere of San Francisco through your music?
That's a good question. We were trying to figure out how to romanticize San Francisco through music, and that was an exciting challenge because we've seen New York and Los Angeles and Paris and all these other great romantic cities romanticized through music and film and cinema for forever. So there's a lot more to draw from. With San Francisco, um, it's a it was it, it's less often depicted on the big screen. So we decided to go with this sort of regal brass and heavy woodwind music that felt like European, and because it was a European seaport town, and I think we just tried to tell an old sort of fairy tale story through this European regal music, over the juxtaposed over the backdrop of black kids in San Francisco in an urban setting. So in 2018. So it was I think it was the unexpected combination of those two elements that made it interesting. You know.
Oh, I agree 100%. And what I love about the score is how subversive it is compared to sort of the average score for a film like this. A lot of the times you'd get, scores that say, "Oh, okay, so it's a story about people of color. Okay, we'll put in a bunch of like rap music and really just go for the stereotypical route." But I really enjoy that you went for a more, I would say, yeah, definitely more subversive route, because it's not what you expect, but it works so well that it's spellbinding almost.
Well, yeah, I think there's also such an amazing history of hip hop in San Francisco and punk rock in San Francisco. And Joe, the director, enlisted a lot of um, San Francisco heroes and sort of peppered them in the film as cameos. You have San Quinn, who's an amazing, legendary Bay Area rapper that's in the candy shop scene, and you have Jello Biafra, who's the from Dead Kennedys, who's giving the tour, and he's a punk rock legend. He's giving the tour on the on the segways in front of Jimmy's house, and then you have, of course, the best example is the great Mike Marshall, who's a staple of the Bay Area community, who sings "If You're Going to San Francisco" in the film. So I think Joe did a really good job of nodding to the history of his city, in all the musical roots, and in other ways that weren't just with the score. And I think that it became a colorful collection of all these different things to paint the picture, to all in service of Jimmy's incredible story. You know, and because it's a true story, we always trying to honor that and live up to his performance and his bravery in this amazing film.
Mm. So you did mention just a few minutes ago about how San Francisco and the Bay Area hasn't been represented on film that much, but I'd say recently there has been a trend of films now finally giving that area um, some more like praise and representation, because you have the film Blind Spotting uh, by David Diggs and Rafael
I
Casal,
love that film.
and there's also, even though it's a more genre based endeavor, Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You, the dystopian sci-fi satire dramedy
I
that
love,
came out also in
I love
2018.
that film as well. Yeah, they're both incredible. Yeah, all three films are about gentrification in the Bay Area. And they all have completely different styles and completely different voices. And but yeah, they've Boots was a big supporter of Joe's film of Last Black Man. He presented it. He at in Oakland when we had the screening at the Grand Rapids Theater, and it was sorry, Great Grand Lake Theater, I think it was called. But yeah, it was. Yeah, it's amazing to see. There's an amazing community of filmmakers in the Bay Area that have been um, that have sort of been pushed out over time, and a lot of them are moving down to LA, and a lot of moving to other places because they're getting priced out. And it's cool to see that these three films came out in a short window of each other and all explored that that issue in different ways. I think it's good they all support each other. You know, it's um, but yeah, you're right. There was a wave of those Bay Area gentrification based films.
And so you meant, so were you at the Oakland screening of the film?
Yes, yeah, there was.
So what was that like?
Oh,
What
it's
was the
amazing,
experience?
amazing. Actually, the night before, there was the San Francisco premiere at the Castro Theater, and that was maybe the most magical of nights. You know, we had it was amazing to see the film because we'd seen it screened at Sundance and we'd seen it screened in LA, but we hadn't seen it screened in San Francisco to a local audience. And it was incredible. You know, Joe used to rip tickets at the Castro Theater as a teenager, and now here he is with his film premiering there. It's a love letter to San Francisco. It's a love letter to his city, and for him to screen it there for that community, for the black community, and for the San Francisco community in San Francisco was really really special. And then Mike Marshall and I performed the song over the credits at the end of the film. We performed "If You're Going to San Francisco," and yeah, that was one for the books, man. That was the best.
So what was the general San Francisco like local opinion on the film and like reaction
It
to
was
the
electric. It was like you know, it played on a whole other level there because there's a lot of references to the city that only people in the city would understand. They're talking about specific high schools or talking about specific neighborhoods that in the rest of the country there you know there's only so much of it that's coming across. Whereas in San Francisco, there's all of these um, things that are baked into the film, whether it be like the cameos that I mentioned before, or just things in the script that they're talking about that are very very specific to that city.
so what are some scenes in the film that you felt had to have very distinct like a very distinct musical tone compared to other scenes in the film? And how did you approach the different themes for characters like Jimmy and Mont?
Um, yeah, I think well the themes sort of revealed themselves in time. Like I didn't set out to write a theme for Jimmy or a theme for Mont. I just wrote a bunch of music in the spirit of the film, and then we found that later on this melody worked for Mont or this melody works for Jimmy, and um, through that process, it sort of revealed itself to us. But my favorite scene in the film, and as far as or musical scene in the film, is the last scene in the film with Jimmy on the boat and that piece of music and how it all kind of comes together at that moment. I think was the most rewarding
Oh,
for me.
I mean the ending to me, the way it's shot, the way it looks, and the gentle music as it gently takes over the scene, I thought was absolutely brilliant. But another track I absolutely adore was Rock Fight.
Oh, cool.
That's such a fun and playful track.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, I love that track too. That one was heavily inspired by the great Michael Nyman. But yeah, I think it was fun to have something that was upbeat and fun and use saxophone and felt unexpected and energetic. You know, to bring that energy to the score was really exciting.
Were there any scenes that you felt were difficult to score or posed a challenge compared to the other scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one scene that was haunting my dreams. It was a scene called the cue's called Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and the scene is um when Mont is talking to the realtor, played by Finn, and they're like the moment where he finds out that Jimmy's grandfather didn't build the house, and that was hard because it had to be mysterious and it had to kind of dance around their dialogue, but also um, drop in a way or land in a way that was heavy and heartbreaking for Mont to realize that Jimmy had been lying, or Jimmy had been telling himself this lie for so long that he started to believe it. It was just a very delicate and tricky line to balance, and I think that there was so many versions of that cue. You know, 20 in the 20s, 25 revisions or something crazy. But I think we got it. We got it just right in the end.
So, how did the score evolve from throughout the process? Like, compare, let's compare the very first demos you had for the producers or and Joe Talbot compared to the final stuff we hear in the film.
I think a lot of it, we recorded a real orchestra in Budapest, um, and the demos were all samples, so a lot of it changed over time. And I think once we got the real orchestra, it was a completely different animal, and then we had to kind of dial it back and so it wasn't too heavy-handed. And I think it was a learning process because it was my first score and it was Joe's first film, feature film. So both of us were figuring it out. But yeah, we found it in the end, and I think um, the final recordings are a lot more. They're just sort of three-dimensional in color versions of the demos.
So, what was it like, having a physical orchestra play the music you've composed? And did you go down to Budapest and for the
No, we did
recording?
it. We did it over Skype. But yeah, it was the best. It was the best. It's the best. Even over Skype, just hearing the orchestra play it and watching a video of them play the music that you've been used to hearing on with samples. It's the most rewarding thing in the world. Hearing an orchestra play your music. It's a very, very, very lucky thing to be able to experience.
Must have felt somewhat surreal.
Completely surreal. Yeah, completely surreal.
So, what was it like working with first-time director Joe Talbot, and Jimmy Falls? And how did you hear about the film? When were you offered it, and how did you come into play?
I saw an early version of the film that the producer Christina O had sent me, and she got my name through my agent, and we I'd watched the film, and then an hour later met with Christina, and then an hour after that met with Joe. Basically, both of them job interviews, and it's funny now they're close friends of mine. But it was a scary thing, It was like a big opportunity for me because A24 and Plan B are amazing companies that make some of the best films out there, and they're working together on this film. And I they gave me an opportunity to demo out. So essentially, write a piece of music for a scene to audition for the film. So I spent the weekend doing that. I sent it to Christina, who then sent it to Joe, and then I got a meeting with them, and then they were running out of time. I think that worked to my benefit because they didn't have time to interview too many other composers, so they'd already talked to quite a few. So I think that was working in my favor, and I got in there, and Joe and I hit it off, and the rest, and then we just hit the ground running, started working.
And what was the experience like working with Joe Talbot? And did you get a chance to work with Jimmy Falls in the process?
Yeah, well, Jimmy, I'd met. First of all, Joe was amazing to work with. Very challenging director, but in the best way. Very detail oriented. knows what he wants, really gets the best out of people, like really pushes them to find their best work and pulls it out of them. And um, we would it was a it was long hours. It was 10 to 15 hour days every day for 3 months, and sometimes 18-hour days, sometimes 24-hour days. And it was an insane, traumatic and romantic experience. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And then and then I met Jimmy. We went out to Sundance for the premiere of the film, and we met Jimmy. It was like meeting George Clooney or something. It was like I'd spent so many hours watching him on the screen. I was so starstruck to meet him. But he's the sweetest guy in the world, and we've become close friends. And we worked together on a piece called "How I Met Mont," which is a story that Jimmy wrote. And um, Joe and Jimmy and I got together in my studio here in LA, and I scored it. We scored it together to with pieces from the score to accompany his story. So we got to work together in that capacity. And yeah, we Jimmy's the greatest guy in the world. Joe too. I love those guys.
Yeah. How I Met Mont is on the actual album for Last Black Man, and it's a great little afterpiece once you finish the film. Like, let the film sit with you for a few days. And I recommend, if you haven't seen Last Black Man in San Francisco, go and watch it. It's a masterpiece. But then afterwards, wait for a bit, and then you can listen to the brilliant story of How I Met Mont, which is a very nuanced and poignant little piece.
Yeah, I'm
So,
so glad you like that. If it's a little bit of like for people that are big fans of the film, it's like a little bit you get a little bit more movie in the end. It's very cool.
what musicians and other film scores and songs in general inspired the music for this film?
Um, Michael Nyman was a big one. One of his pieces was used in the film. So there was three pieces of music that were already in the film before I became on board. One of them was Michael Nyman's piece, and one of them was Joni Mitchell's "Blue," and one of them was Mike Marshall singing "If You're Going to San Francisco," with a tuba accompanied by Daniel Herskadal. So all of the score that I wrote had to live alongside those three pieces of music. So they were hugely instrumental in helping shape the score. Like it had to live alongside that. It had to feel hopefully as worthy of living alongside those three great pieces of music, and it had to feel classic. So those are big influences.
And to further understand San Francisco and its atmosphere and the overall city, did you work with any local musicians and artists and creatives to further open your sort of mind to the city?
Not specifically San Francisco musicians. No, besides Mike Marshall, of course. No, it was the musicians were a lot of them were from LA. An amazing vocalist named Camila Gibson sang, and I went to Brooklyn to record her. Um, and then you know Mike's from San Francisco, and then Daniel Herskadal is from Norway. So it was people from all over the world came together to that a lot of people touched this music. I think it's not specifically San Francisco artists, but it's on the music side.
So, in the future, what sort of films do you want to work on? What sort of films do you want to score? Are there any certain directors you'd like to collaborate with, and any certain genres that you haven't touched that you want to sort of get into and explore in terms of
Yeah,
music scoring?
that's a great question. I'd love to work. Generally speaking, I love to work on films that have a lot of room for big score, a lot of room for melody and romantic music, um, and exploration. Specific filmmakers, there's too many to mention. Um, that I love to work with. Um, but yeah, just mainly just trying to push myself in no specific genre either. Just trying to find projects that challenge me and that I have room for music to be expansive and melodic.
Out of like let's say the last 5 or 6 years in cinema, what are your favorite scores from the last 5 years?
Oh, it's a good question. I think eighth grade um, by Anna Meredith is one of my favorite scores the last 5 6 years. Um, oh, Under the Skin. I think that was over 6 years ago. But Under the Skin by Mika Levy is a masterpiece. Um, Nick Bertel's score for If Beale Street Could Talk is just about as good as it gets. It's just a masterpiece. It's so beautiful and heartbreaking. Um, those are three. Mika, Anna, and Nick's scores for those three films are really mind blowing and inspiring. Also, Johnny Greenwood, and these are maybe obvious, um, choices, but yeah, everything Johnny Greenwood's done has been out of this world. Especially,
Oh, I agree.
especially the master. I think that scores. I think that also might not be in the 5 or 6 year mark. I think that's probably seven.
It's still recent enough to,
Yeah,
yeah.
Phantom Thread
But
too. Obviously, is just the most beautiful thing you've ever heard.
have you seen his last film he scored, which is "You Were Never Really Here" by director Lynn Ramsey?
Yeah, I love that score. I love that score. It's more synthetic and visceral and yeah, really inspiring, really adventurous sonically, and really moving.
And with Mika Levi, she did Monos's score, which is also a very visceral listening experience. But her music I found quite haunting for Under the Skin.
Yeah, it really was. It really it gets under your skin.
Yeah, it lasts with you. Like the music and the images from the film, it lasts with you for quite a bit,
It
and
sure
it's
does.
definitely something
It sure does.
that's.
Yeah, no, it really resonates. Yeah, and I loved your score for Monos too. We watched that recently, actually. Um, yeah, she's on another level. It really blows my mind.
You returned to Sundance again at the start of the year with Minari by director Lee Isaac Chung. So I wanted to ask, what sort of, because the soundtrack hasn't been released anywhere, there's no trailers, so everything is still very new about the film. What sort of soundtrack will the film have, and what did you use to get inspired for this film's soundtrack?
It's a good question. I just come off of another film, and I'd um, written a bunch of music at once before Isaac started shooting the film. So he edited, Harry Ewan, the incredible editor, um, had used my sketches to to help him with the edit, and he extended certain scenes to fit the music instead of the other way around, which I was very grateful for. That that process was incredible, and my wife and I went down to Tulsa to she's from Tulsa, she was born there, to visit the set while they were shooting, so I could be there and on set and in July in the heat in Tulsa and on the farm and get inspired by the the way the air feels there, the way it smells, all that, and really kind of get into the weeds with Isaac and Stephen um, and then you know slowly tweak and conform and massage my sketches into final recordings and scores, and then we recorded the orchestra in Macedonia this time, and yeah, it was a really special film.
So Minari centers around a Korean family in America. and they moved onto a farm. So with this score, did you try and sort of blend the two cultures of farmland America the with the sort of new, like with the Korean music? Did you look into any Korean composers or Korean
No,
instrumental musics when
not
researching?
not really. No, it wasn't important to Isaac to have Korean music. Um, the music feels very American. It's a very American story too. It's a Korean American family, but it's about the American dream. It's about a family moving to America in the '80s, and yeah, it's an American film. Um, the only Korean element, um, that's tangible in the film musically is the Han Yeti, the actress that plays Monica in the film, one of the the, the main characters in the film. She and I collaborated um, on a song that plays over the end credits, along with the with the Stephanie Hong, who was also a huge hero in the film, who translated and wrote the lyrics in Korean from translated my English lyrics and rewrote them to this beautiful poem in Korean, and then Han Yeti sang the song over the end credits. So that was a nice lullaby, for the end of the film. But other than that, the music was not specifically Korean, um, stylistically.
So with Minari, were there any challenges you faced when composing the music?
Yeah, with with Minari, it was actually um, it wasn't challenging. In this, I had a lot of time, and it was really a dream, and it was really effortless to write the music because I wrote the music with a specific feeling, and then um, the the film was they started editing it with my music in it. So by the time I saw the first cut, it had 70% or something of my music in it already. So it was challenging to it was a lot of work to cut it and to revise it and to get it to click with the film, but it was easier than other films. I think because maybe it was my third time doing it, and because um, I had a lot of time. We had 6 months. I had more time than any other film.
So you work with Minari. It's directed by Lee Isaac Chung. So what was it like working with him? He's done quite a few films. So how does he compare when it comes to, like, what was his style compared to someone like Joe Talbot or Miranda Julie?
Yeah, they're all very different. They're all very different, and they're all incredible in their own ways. Um, Isaac was a little bit more hands off with the music, partly because we had a lot more time, and maybe partly because it's his style. It's hard to say. Um, they're all very, they're all brilliant, and they all get the best out of the people they work with. But they have different styles, and I think Isaac was the most trusting, in part because that's his style, and maybe in part because we had the most amount.
What was it like watching Minari for the first time with your music in and everything basically completed for Sundance? What was it like experiencing it for the first time after working on it for
It,
so long?
it was incredible. It was incredible. It was amazing to see it on the big screen with all these people that worked on it, and it got people really connected to it and responded well to it, and yeah, it was a dream.
So another film you've worked on that also premiered at Sundance was Kajillionaire by very well known indie director Miranda Julie. and that also was a pretty big Sundance hit. So, Kajillionaire, it's a crime. It's a some of a crime type film. So, what was your approach to this soundtrack, and how is it unique compared to something like a American Dream Family, like Minari, and how is it compared to the gentrification fairy tale that was The Last Black Man in San Francisco?
It was completely different than any other film. You know, Miranda has her own instrument that she plays that's very very special and very unique, and I think that it's hard to compare to any other film. Um, I had a lot less time to score her film. We did it in 5 weeks as opposed to 6 months that we with Minari. Um, but it was a dream to work with her, and it was amazing to find something it's a love story, and to find something that was romantic and but also strange and unexpected and kind of fit the fabric of the world that she created. It was cut from the same fabric of the world that she created with her film. So yeah, it was completely different. But yeah, it's a unique film. I'm excited for people to see it.
So, what's your thoughts on the somewhat? There's a current debate going on when it comes with temp music in films. Now, some people feel that it has a negative impact on the film scoring process and film music in general, while others they are saying that it's a natural part of the filmmaking process and doesn't have much effect on the final product. So, what are your thoughts on this? On the current debate going
I
on?
think it's case by case. It can definitely have its challenges. If a director becomes attached to temp music, it's hard to get it to pry it out of their hands. But it can also be very helpful. If it can also give you sort of some direction to run in. The blank canvas can be overwhelming and daunting too. So I think I prefer to not have temp if I can choose, but I don't think it's always a bad thing.
For me, and my short films, it's with temp music. I sometimes I put it in just so if I have to give it show it in front of like my film class or show it to others like a first draft, they have some sort of musical. But at the same time, I don't. I try to refrain giving temp music to the composers I work with because I want them to absorb the film with their own music in mind, so they can approach the score from
Well,
how they
well,
feel is
God bless
fit.
you for that. That's the best way to do it if you can. I think that's great.
I do tell them beforehand stuff like genre or what somewhat sound I'm going for. So, for example, my new film is heavily inspired by the Coen brothers. So I said, look into some Coen-esque films and Carter Burwell, but don't let that restrict you completely. Just take
Yeah.
that with like a
No, that's
hint.
great. That's great. Carter Burwell's incredible. One of my favorites.
Because the way I feel about temp music is if you make the composers only stick to your temp music, then it has like a recycled effect to the music almost. And another thing with big blockbusters, if they only rely on temp music and then the composer just uses the temp music and like just changes up a bit, you might end up just having like constantly the same few tracks repeating itself in a handful of blockbusters.
Totally. Totally, yeah. You can feel it too when you watch a film and you know what the temp was. I find that it happens a lot.
So, in the future, are there any sounds or instruments you would like to experiment with in both your albums and your film and TV scores?
It's a good question. I always wanted to do a score that was all vocals, that was only vocals with no instruments. but I don't know what style or what that would look like. That was something I wanted to explore.
The film Swiss Army Man has that sort of purely vocal style. There are some, I think there are a little bit of music that plays, but it's mainly a cappella almost the whole score.
Yeah, that's an incredible movie. I love that. And Paul Dano, he sings in it, right? He sings on some tracks on the album.
Oh yeah, I think both the cast they do sing a bit, and they have like, um, but yeah, I feel like that watching that film, the music was so distinct. It gives you a really new experience, and yeah, I would love to see you score a film just purely through vocals. That would be incredible.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah, hopefully one day. It's a challenge
So
too.
now your next, well, your project that's coming out fairly soon is Homecoming season two,
That's right.
which is a continuate, which is season one was a huge breakout hit. Everyone talked about it. Now season two is coming. Everyone's excited, and your music will be in the show. So, what was it like working with the people who work on Homecoming, like Sam Esmail and that gang? And what is the biggest differences between working on a TV show compared to working on a film? What are the pros and cons in your eyes for
Um,
both?
yeah, it was a new experience for me working on the show, having to write. It's just a tremendous amount of music that has to be written. The biggest pro was that we got a bigger budget to record an orchestra here in LA, so we got to record um, here at East West Studios here in Los Angeles. For all 7 episodes, we had about 5 sessions, and yeah, we got to push the players to experiment more, and we had more time and more money, so that was the biggest um, pro. And also the fact that it's 7 episodes long, you really have the opportunity to develop themes and push it further as far as like bringing things back and having them elevate and change and evolve over the course of the longer format. Um, Maybe the biggest con is the same thing, that it's more music to write and less time. So it, you know it it's more of a challenge. It's more challenging. But the only con is that people don't hear it on the big in the movie theater. People don't hear the orchestra on the big speakers. Other than that, TV is amazing.
So I'm actually super excited to watch Homecoming. I am gonna watch the first season before I see the second one.
Great.
But now that I heard you're working on the second one, I'm like, I have so much more reasons to watch it now because your score is just your music is so interesting and subversive compared to all the fairly bland, generic TV show music. So I'm excited because I feel like you're gonna hit us with some amazing fire.
Well, thanks, man. I really hope so. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I really do.
If you could collaborate with one other composer to make a score, which composer and why?
Carter Burwell, or one of the legends, or Danny Elfman, somebody that got me involved in film music, got me inspired to do it in the first place. Or actually, maybe the great Randy Newman. That would be the number one collaboration for me. Number one dream come true. But it's hard to imagine what that would look like because they don't need any help from me, you know. So I would just be honored to be in the same room as one of those guys.
So your film scores have been mainly in the indie film scene. Are there any upcoming indie directors that you would also want to collaborate with?
Upcoming indie directors. There's one director that I'd love to work with named Derek Cianfrance. Um, a reason I bring him up is because I love all of his work, and he's had different composers work on each film, so he doesn't have his go-to person. He made a movie called Blue Valentine, which I loved, that Grizzly Bear scored. and then he made a movie called A Place Beyond the Pines, which had an amazing score by Mike Patton. He's got a new show on HBO called This Much Is True, um, with another composer, and I think, yeah, I love his work. But yeah, there's too many to mention. There's too many.
So that is the end of our episode today. However, before we go, Mr. Mosseri, is there anything you'd like to plug or give a shout out to? The stage is yours.
I'd say Human Love. You know, that's I'm very excited about this record. We're putting it out this July, and it's really close to my heart, and I really can't wait for people to hear it. So yeah, Human Love, Black Void is the name of the EP.
So, yep, that wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I would like to thank our wonderful guest, Mr. Emile Mosseri. It's been an honor interviewing you,
The
and
honor's been
I
mine.
can't wait.
Thanks.
I can't wait to see your work and what you do next. And hopefully, one day we can collaborate on a film score.
Yeah, I would love that. Thanks so much, man. Thanks for taking the time.